Joe, what's up, my friend?
All right, T, what's going on, man? We are live. The
All good.
podcast that shall not be named just won't go away either.
We might stick with that, you know. We'll have to come up with a name, but for now, it's the No Name Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for checking it out. You know, um, I don't know what you're seeing. Obviously, events are, but my theory here is that events will take over at some point. Like nobody's really in control now. That events themselves will be in control and probably will be in control for some time, right? As sort of stupid decisions and bad ideas get played out for what they are. And I think that's the phase that we're living in. What do you see before I dive into today's ideas and thoughts and contents?
Yeah, well, I think that's the battle. I think for the first time in quite a while, we are starting to see some pushback to just the idiocracy within kind of like official circles. But you've still got the same old folks just pushing these ideas that are just outrageous. They can't work. They defy reality. So there's a disconnect, and it's almost like, it's almost like there's a tug of war that appears to be forming. We'll see. We'll see what
Yeah,
what plays out. But I think the next several months are going to be very
I
interesting.
think you're right. I think you're right. The decision this past week in Brazil, this judge De Moraes to ban X, to ban Twitter. I'm old school. I'll call
Brazilian
it.
Voldemort.
Yeah, exactly.
Have
I
you
love
seen a
that.
picture of that dude, by the way?
Yeah, yeah. He's
Yeah, man, he
he
looks the
he
part.
he looks the part. Yeah, he looks the part. There's no question. Somebody wrote about him and said he's essentially the second most powerful guy in Brazil, and he obviously has
Okay.
tremendous power. I mean, if you can censor, but again, it brings up the question. So okay, so you can censor free speech for I forget how many people are in Brazil. It's like 200 million people plus. If you can censor free speech for that many people, why do you need to censor free speech? And there's only really one reason that the truth ever gets and free speech ever gets censored, which is the people in charge of society, of the culture and the governmental institutions, the state, are up to no good. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about this today. I shot a video recently talking about this.
And by the way,
You
what I don't know if we said it explicitly. What he did was censor Twitter or X,
He
right?
censored Twitter if you use, and the penalty is a $9,000 fine if you use a VPN
Per
per day,
day. That's
per
per
day
day
to go around, right, the censorship. But
because
my
they can't
point is,
actually enforce it if you
you
use a
can't.
VPN.
You
But
can't. How are you going to enforce it? So now you got to make people afraid to use VPNs, and then how do you police that? And right, I'm sure there is a technological way to track that. But the point is, you can only do this to a society for a certain period of time. I mean, the Soviet Union sort of holds the record, certainly in our modern history, where they essentially tried to reconstruct and re-engineer human nature and get people to tattletale on each other, right? Family members, right? You're taught in school to rat out your parents because they're not loyal enough to the state, like the same kind of
and
shit that you
by the
see
way,
coming
you
down the
remember
pipe.
we adopted the same thing. See something, say something.
It's coming.
20 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah,
It's already
exactly.
been here, it's just in a
Yeah, it's
different
been here, but I
context.
mean, it's going to get ramped up. Where like, your
Right.
third grade child is going to, tell on your teacher, and you're going to get a visit from the FBI at 2 a.m. with no knocks. And so, point being, right, you can only do this kind of draconian, threatening, censorship, cutting off like the basic things that people need in order to live, to survive, to to support themselves, right? And also to interact with other people. If you take away people's ability to speak freely, you're headed for trouble. So what this means to me and where I'm going with this is obviously you can only do this for a brief period of time. So this is being done for a reason. The crescendo is coming. The denouement is almost here. Whatever's gonna be rolled out, whatever thunderclap of fate we're gonna see, whatever, tremendously upsetting, societal overturning kind of events are coming. They're coming soon because you won't be able to keep this kind of censorship forever. Any government knows that. Any government is perfectly aware you can only have price controls for so long, right, before the whole thing essentially derails. And so censorship, the penalizing of free speech in Brazil, which is not a small population, and the idea that you can do this and get away with it and people are going to play along and everybody's going to continue to be peaceful is a complete fallacy, right? That is not going to happen. And so that's disturbing. Of course, Durov as far as we know, right, he's still in a French jail, I guess,
And this
right?
is
Pavel
Pavel
Durov,
Durov, the founder of Telegram,
the
right?
founder of Telegram. The story that I read, and it seems to me that this is likely true, is that people in Telegram, first of all, the governments have mechanisms by which they can reach out to Elon Musk and Pavel Durov and Mark Zuckerberg and say, listen, you take that material down or else, right? And they have ways of throttling different posts. And apparently Pavel was a bit reluctant or a little too slow on the draw to try to respond, or he's completely actually unwilling and said, fuck you, right? I'm not throttling anything. And so people are able to pass around, especially information. I don't know that this part is or isn't true, but it's an interesting angle, especially information about what's happening in Gaza. And that obviously people who run the media companies of the world are not fond of being outed for the kind of slaughter that is being perpetrated over there. And I imagine it's way worse than anybody is allowed to say on mainstream media. And so on one end, obviously, bravo to Pavel for giving the middle finger to these scumbags. But, you know, what price is he going to pay and how long is he going to pay it before
And
he
he's,
knuckles
by the way,
under?
he's got like three different citizenships, I believe.
Right.
His French is one of them. I believe it's Switzerland is another,
He's
isn't it?
Russian. Yeah, I mean,
Russia,
right.
no, Russian is one, and then I think
Yep.
UAE. I think he has citizenship.
UAE. And the
So
UAE
he's not
came to
even.
his, yeah,
Yeah,
for what it's worth, the UAE came to his rescue. The word is, and I believe this
that's
is true.
United Arab Emirates, by the
Yes,
way.
United Arab Emirates defunded their order of $80 billion of French fighter jets. That's a lot of money to lose, right? Over one man's decision to promote free speech. And so, first of all, good for the people of UAE, whoever made that decision. And but again, right, it shows how important this issue of censorship slash free speech is to the powers that be and to the people in charge. And it's a very, it should put everyone on even you know, it should put you on high alert that big trouble is coming because this will not last.
Did you see though that Zuckerberg wrote to Congress? I think that was on Monday. I think it was this
Yes.
Monday, and he
Yes.
said he regrets,
Yeah.
the
He copped to it.
censorship, and basically said they were pressuring him, and he doesn't believe it was right, and he regrets that he went along with it. That's interesting. Number one,
Yeah,
it
I mean
confirms what we already knew,
it confirms
but
what you
there's
knew.
still people who won't. They
It confirms what you
refuse to
knew.
believe.
It seems like he's
But
trying to
yeah,
lessen his punishment, right, for the
yeah.
next
So where's the
administration.
punishment coming from, right? That's the interesting part. Why now? What is it he's seeing that makes him think, okay, I've gotta come out and apologize and
Yep.
get on the other side of the free speech issue,
Taibbi,
which is the right side.
yeah, Matt Taibbi, the great investigative journalist, one of the last few investigative journalists, the guy who did the Twitter files investigation, and has done so much good work in recent times. He talked about where was I going with that? He was saying that about Zuckerberg that obviously we knew that, like, they knew that this was going down. They knew that stories were being throttled and essentially blocked, right, from any kind of amplification on Facebook, on Twitter, on all of these different platforms. But Taibbi has reported with, I think, great conviction, and I don't think this is a secret. Zuckerberg threw $400 million or, like some insane amount of money toward defeating Trump. And now, of course, he was all impressed. Several weeks ago, right after the attempted assassination, Trump gets hit with a bullet. And he was saying what a badass Trump was. And I quote, right, that was a badass thing that he did after he got shot. And so, the tide is turning in a certain way. I am reluctant to get my hopes up that anything good will come from those quarters, simply because, again, the dynamic that the technologists, the technocracy, wants to continue to evolve AI to their benefit and, quite frankly, to the detriment of a lot of society. It is, of course, not spoken about that way. It is, of course, rolled out and presented as a sort of wonderful boost to productivity and a panacea for X,
best
Y, and
case
Z.
scenarios. And you know what? If only the best case scenarios were to occur, then it would be a great boon. If only the good and none of the
Right.
bad potential. Okay,
Which
yeah,
is,
great.
yeah,
But
that's right.
there are some serious implications and concerns as well. That
Well, Whitney Webb brought this up. I listened to something she said recently that, AI will make the people who rely on it stupid, right? Like if you rely on it to do things the same way you use a calculator, and people who never learned arithmetic, for example, can't add, subtract, multiply, and divide. AI will, of course, have that same effect on just overall cognitive function, right? Thinking clearly to put together a sentence. I believe this is actually the case. I have watched, and I'm old enough to have seen in my lifetime how the internet, and I mean the idea of going on an internet dating site. I mean, it still makes me, right? I guffaw when I think about this, because and I understand why people do it, right? I've watched younger guys who can't speak to women, right? Can't have a conversation anymore because why don't we text instead, right? And so I believe that we are paying a price for that. I think it's undeniable at this stage. And I don't know if you know this, there's Greek mythology, and I don't know where I read this. The Greek god of technology, Techne, god or goddess, Techne would deliver his gift to humanity, and the price for that gift, i.e. technology, was a diminution, a lessening, a decrease in the ability of the human race. That's very interesting that they nailed that, 2,400 years ago or whenever that was written. But the idea that technology does in fact help you, but the price that you pay is that you're less than you would otherwise develop yourself to be. Well, you see that. You absolutely see that. That is absolutely the case right now. And so where does that end? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah, you try to project out what's the world look like in 20 years. Maybe what's the world look like in 10 years? I
Nobody
don't
knows.
know.
Nobody knows, and nobody can. It is now, it is impossible, I think, to imagine what the world is going to look like even 5 years from now. I don't know that we've ever lived through a period where that was the case, but it's totally possible that the world is unrecognizable in 5 years, should we be around to witness it. So
so I guess just one benefit of technology that's worth mentioning though is it has helped us conquer scarcity, in the sense that in the developed world and worlds where there are actually permitted markets and capital formation in these things, we now, certainly in the US here where I am, we throw away more food than we could ever need, And now, granted, not all of it is the most healthy food, but regardless, if you go back 200 years, the biggest challenge was securing enough calories, whereas today we've conquered that scarcity.
We almost
through
need to
technology.
Yes, I agree, and that is true, and you have to give sort of just rewards to that fact that the world has become so wealthy because of especially communications technology. But now we're going to see a whole different level and a whole different game. But I think also we almost need to coin a term for things that, like, unprecedented doesn't really capture it, right? There's the sort of general feeling that we're crossing a Rubicon almost every day, right? The reference to Julius Caesar's march back into Rome, which precipitated the Civil War around whatever that was, 65 BC, right? 65 BC. In any case, there's a bunch of these things. There's a bunch of things that are unprecedented. There's a bunch of things that are now beyond the point of any ability to correct course, and or maybe not, but it certainly looks like we're beyond the point of course correction. And I wrote to you about this before the show on the big disconnect. One of these crossing of the Rubicons, right? One of these unprecedented phenomena is there really are tons and tons of people, like millions and millions of people, who don't understand what productivity and value and what kinds of things are necessary for civilization to exist, right? To continue to maintain itself. The anecdote that I told you when we chatted, I'll just share it again here. When I moved to San Francisco I did a grad school degree in this was my medical years. And I was studying East-West medicine very closely in a comparative study of how the two medical systems really work together or complemented one another. Fascinating subject still to this day. And I remember seeing, because I had been living in the forest in Guatemala for about 5 years at that point, pretty much without a break. And so obviously you live in a forest in a backwards place like Guatemala, it changes some part of you, right? Especially for that long. And so I had a big culture shock coming back to a big city like
Yes.
San Francisco, as you can imagine. And I remember seeing, and it was another thing that almost made me collapse with laughter. There was a bumper sticker that said "No war for oil." And I thought nobody could be that stupid. You can't be that dumb to think that, like, but you're driving a car, right? You don't understand that that's like part of the deal. And I get it. I get no war for oil. Like, let's not go bomb people and steal their oil, right? Which was going on at that time. And but here I'm talking about, people. I spent time in Panama. Panama was shut down, the big Cobre, I forget what it's called, the Cobre something or other mine, which is one of the massive copper mine that was being developed by Franco-Nevada, if I'm not mistaken, the big
Right.
mining royalty company. And it was shut down. Like, they shuttered the entire thing because there's a big protest. And shutting down Panama is not difficult. It's such a narrow isthmus of land that you could block it. You could block all the major arteries, and people sat on the Pan American Highway just north of or west of Panama City, and that was it, right? You couldn't get trucks in and out. All commerce ground to a halt, and that was it. And it's like, but wait a second, do you understand? Like, everything that you're taking pictures with your cell phone, which is using metals that come from the mine, that you're blocking them from now mining, right? And so we're living at a time when, and again, like, what word could we give to this? There must be one. There must be a term that describes this. We're living in the big disconnect. We're living in a
Yeah.
time when, I have another example I'm going to share with folks, but the big disconnect is an enormous segment of the population does not understand value, does not understand where things come from, does not understand
Right.
that, like, no
We
oil,
take
no
so
war
much
for
for
oil
granted.
on your car means you're an idiot, right?
You
And
know,
so
it's
what do you
I get
see?
yeah, I get very frustrated when I hear people, use capitalism is denigrated, the term capitalism. And it's always because, and I can't think of a great example off the top of my head, but I'm sure everybody's experienced this where somebody sees a product that they think is not very good or overpriced, or maybe a service that they don't like, and they say, oh, capitalism, that company's just greedy and wants money, because they don't like the product or service.
Like Joe
Uh,
Biden?
and
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
but
yeah.
that same person lives in a house with central heating and air. It's never cold, never hot. It's always just right. Running water,
Running
take
water,
showers every day,
plumbing, yeah,
electricity, plumbing.
yeah.
They've got refrigerator that keeps their food cold. They go to the grocery store to get their food, drive down the road in their car with gasoline. Got a smartphone in their pocket. They probably sit and binge watch their Netflix and Amazon Prime shows with Marxist themes running in the undercurrents, and those are the people who are denigrating capitalism, yet they live a life of luxury that 150 years ago, the wealthiest people alive could not
Could not
fathom.
imagine.
And, I'll tell you, T, I don't think I've shared this with you before, but a couple of years ago, I set up a nonprofit foundation specifically to undertake and raise money for a water project in Uganda. So I got to know a Ugandan pastor, a guy that he was here in the US from Uganda. And, got to know this guy pretty good. He was doing good work in the community. And he started to share with me, he was from a rural village in Uganda. Something like it's close to 80% of the population in Uganda does not have electricity or running water, meaning their house isn't, they have no running water. And some of them do have solar panels, so they can get electricity that way. But 80% are not, the houses are not connected to a national electric grid. And so it's very, very spotty, very sporadic. And there's outside of the capital city and maybe one other big city, there are no supermarkets, there are no restaurants. You've got little open air markets where
Subsistence.
people will go.
Yep.
And basically the vendors at these little open air markets, all they do is they travel to the big city and they just buy whatever goods they can, and they come back and they resell them for a slight profit.
That's right.
But those folks, so we raised money for a water project which we just completed earlier this year. We drilled a borehole and installed a solar pump and created something like, I think, six basically outlets within the village with big water towers. And so the central water spring would pump to these different locations. Prior to that, the villagers were walking, depending on where they were in the village, somewhere between 1 and 2 miles to a natural spring in the jungle with their pails of water to
Believe it.
collect the water. In most households, they were going at least twice a day,
Yeah.
roughly an hour walk. And they were doing this twice a day. And you look at that, and these folks, when they come to the US, they're amazed at the comforts and the luxuries we have. And it is because the reason Uganda is that way is because capitalism is not permitted. You can't, there are so many restrictions and regulations and taxes just to starting a business. Most businesses can't even start, but they don't even have the capital to start, even if they could get through the regulatory bureaucracy and the corruption. It's incredibly corrupt. And the reason it is there's very little foreign direct investment. And that's because foreign companies know if they invest money in the country, it's not going to go to a company that they can control and then deploy that capital to build out infrastructure,
No.
because the infrastructure doesn't even exist,
Right.
And that's what life without capitalism
And the principle,
looks
yeah,
like.
and the principle of, hey, this money has to be used for this. Like, no, it's gonna be siphoned off, it's gonna be lifted. It's, it's
Yeah,
not secure, so therefore you
yeah,
can't. Yeah, Guatemala is a little bit like this. First of all, you're a prince, my friend. You really are a fine fellow for that kind of thing. I've seen that kind of. Guatemala is a wealthy place by comparison, in the sense that it's a tiny area with a ton of resources that's just been very badly developed and managed, right, over many, many decades. Um, but the same poverty exists. I know what that is. I know.
yeah.
I've
It's
seen
subsistence
families with
living.
kids. Yeah, kids with a dirt floor and a tin roof
Yeah,
and bamboo walls and a open fire pit where mom cooks tortillas inside the house. Like, that's reality. It's
yeah.
reality for less and less people there, but I've seen it. And so I know exactly what you're describing. And the idea of having like fresh water, like, well, maybe you get that, but maybe you don't, And so illness and everything that goes along with that. And capital, you stop and think, it's like the great theme of Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged is exactly that, right? And the great example that's used by various people, various economists, probably Milton Friedman and Hayek and all of the great, and Mises, and right, all the great economists have used this. What does it take to make a pencil? Right?
Nobody
You go
knows.
through
No
like
single person knows.
lumber companies. Yeah, exactly. The metal company that makes the little ring that puts the eraser on, and like, how do you get graphite, right? You got to mine it, and right, it comes out of the ground, and like big trucks have to do that, and like all of this stuff to make a pencil.
The
And
most basic
yeah, I
good.
mean, Hayek's observation, the great Friedrich Hayek. If you're watching this, especially if you're a young person, you want to educate yourself on these matters. He's more readable than von Mises, I think it's fair to say this. And Hayek is
Yeah.
highly entertaining. It's a serious topic, so you have to want to expand your mind in this direction. But Hayek's explanation of, like, look, all of the things that you have are created by people that you will never ever meet, and you will never need to meet them or have anything to do with them, because what they did was look at a price signal and figure out that they could make their own lives better by helping you. And if you get your head around that statement, if you get your mind around that dynamic, that's why we're so well off. And anything that stands in the way of that, and all of the grievances against capitalism are, of course, not grievances against capitalism. They're attempts by the people, the parasitic class that's in charge of our institutions, and that has always been in charge to some degree, but that is particularly virulent at this time in history. This is the arguments that they make to siphon off more of your productive efforts.
Yeah.
And so once you understand that, you know why it's really, really important to not let these people win, which is partly why we're doing this podcast, I think, right?
Yeah, well, whatever, to whatever extent we can we can lend a little bit of resistance, I think just it all comes down to having the understanding, because we've corrupted the educational system, certainly in the US here, to the extent where children are taught the opposite of the foundational principles of what made America what it is today, and truly
That's
what
it.
made Western civilization
That's another
what it is
Rubicon that's
today.
been crossed. I don't think the education system can be salvaged. I don't think there's I don't think there's a point out there where you can go, okay, well, if we just do this, things are going to improve. I think it is by and large a lost cause. I think people feel this, and I'm not even, that's leaving aside gender studies and teaching
Oh
anal
yeah, all the
sex, to
crazy stuff they
9-year-olds
push
in
on the
like kids'
kids.
books.
Yeah,
Yeah, come on, like
yeah.
really? Why are we having even a debate about that? Like anybody in favor of that is obviously your enemy, is obviously like these people need to
The
be,
enemy of human civilization.
yeah, the
It
enemy of
really is.
civilization. They are the enemies
Um,
of civil. They are the termites eating away at the foundation of how people live together in peace and prosper. And so I think all of that's true. The other big disconnect that I wanted to, or again, whatever name I can come up with for this, I heard this recently, or I heard something that triggered a thought for me, Joe, and this will sound harsh coming out the first time, but I'll give you evidence for it. We've now crossed into a time, and we're now living in a time when, and I challenge anybody to come up with I know there are counter examples, but we're living in a time when to be part of a societal institution, especially anything tied to the state, means that you are actually part of the problem. And what I mean by that is this, and the examples that I came up with in my own mind is, think of the CDC or just the AMA, the American Medical Association. How many doctors understood that what was taking place in the 2020s, the the plague that we will not name so the AI doesn't pick it up, uh, how many doctors understood what a debacle was unfolding? Not a small number. It was a large number,
they
right?
weren't allowed to talk about
They
it.
weren't allowed to talk. Now, the correct response to that by a free man in a free society, at least a society that can still claim to be functional, is to, if it costs you your medical license, by God, you stand up and you say what's true and you take the consequences. And several did. I've been lucky.
Yeah,
Our good friend, he lives right there in Virginia, not too far from you, Dr. Robert Malone, wonderful man.
yeah, yeah.
His wife too. I've run into him on several occasions, traveling in various places, heard him speak a couple of times. He stood up, didn't cost him his license. Peter McCulloch stood up. Several others, very notably, stood up and said, right? Don't take these, don't do this,
Yeah.
right?
There's
Here's what's
a
happening.
family that just joined my investment membership, the Phoenician League. Same situation. The gentleman was a doctor, and he stopped. I forget the exact story, but he refused to comply with what was taking place, what the edicts that were being pushed, and he set up a cash practice. So
Hat tip to him.
cash practice, no insurance, accepted.
Yeah,
So that gives him more freedom. But he, shared with me that it's difficult,
it's
getting,
dicey.
because people expected the insurance to pay for, everything
That's right.
anymore,
That's
which that
right.
in itself is
How's
a
he
problem.
doing now? Like, is he still in
I
practice?
think
Like, did
he's,
he,
yeah, I think he's got it up and running
and he's
now.
still all
I didn't
cash,
ask
or
him
he's back
about
in
it.
the system?
So all cash, all
Wow,
cash. Yeah. So he's not
that's
going
brilliant.
back. And, and his marketing message for his practice is, I don't work for the government. I don't work for the insurance company. I work for patients.
I love it.
And I just applaud that so much. It was so
Yeah,
they're
it's
out,
good to hear. They're out
but
there. They're out there. But my
unfortunately,
point was,
so
and
many. Yeah.
yeah, the way this guy positioned it and the way he said it, when I heard the thought itself, I said, you know what? That actually is true. The other, and there's a big controversial, like the jagged pill that nobody wants to swallow is, well, you can't criticize doctors. They're at the front line, and the nurses are doing their best, and all the rest, and that's all true, right? But it was believed prior to, let's call it the before times, as our friend Doug Casey likes to call it. In the before times, i.e., before all the madness began in January 2020, let's say, in the before times, it was understood that if somebody was caught embezzling money, or like the city, the mayor was up to no good, right? Well, then it was a bad apple that got into the system. That's what we
Right.
believed. Now you do have to look and actually give very serious consideration to the fact
It's
that
systemic.
if you're part of the system at all, you're also doing harm. You're also causing problems, not because there's no good people, but because the mission of the actual, like the people driving the ship onto the rocks, if you're contributing in any way, you're contributing to the ship getting driven onto the rocks. And, the other example that I thought up, and this is wildly unpopular, but I'll say it anyway, this has been true of our military for a long time. And, to
You're
be
from a
critical,
military family, aren't you?
come from a military family, right? This
Yeah.
is heresy. But again, right, that is a talking point where, well, how dare you, and how dare you criticize these people who are defending our freedoms and all the rest. It's like, let's look at that for a second, right? In the first place, all the wars that have been fought in our lifetime have been wars of aggression, right? Where the US has gone and invaded somebody because, like, you're not allowed to think communist thoughts in North Vietnam, or right, we got to invade over here because, Saddam Hussein wants to sell oil in euros instead of dollars, right? Or whatever the offense might have been. It was always the case that we were invading other people. And the events of September 11th, very suspicious, very suspiciously don't look like the story that we were told. Let's just leave that and open that can of worms another day. And yet the military is sent off, and 1 million Iraqis are killed who had what the fuck did they have to do with anything, right? And our Madeline Halfbright, Secretary of State at the time, famously said, that 500,000 Iraqi children are dead, but it's probably worth it
So
because we're,
hold on. She just to set the stage for that. She's on 60 Minutes,
yeah,
which at that time was still considered a very
was still a big
reputable
deal.
news show.
Yeah,
I don't think it is today, at least I hope not. But she's on 60 Minutes, and they ask her that question. More than 500,000 Iraqi children had died as a result of U.S. intervention, and she takes a deep breath
I
and she
think it
looks
was
in the
worth it.
camera and she said, "Yeah, yeah, but we think it was worth it.
We think it was worth it,
It's like worth killing
because
500,000
because we're the
kids
chosen
because of."
country. Yeah,
I mean, it's just insane.
yeah. And so, again, this is not a comment on the bravery or the sacrifice of I get it, right? I get it. And you probably can't get it. I shouldn't say that. Like, obviously, I remember seeing a young man. I was teaching a dance class in Florida when I still lived in Florida, when we were working at the office together, and or when I was working at the office. And I remember seeing a guy, he had one arm and one leg, and he had a prosthesis in both. And he asked his beloved to marry him. We were dancing. We were doing an outdoor dance class, and they set it up so that she came around the corner and he would surprise her and all the rest. I thought, how charming. And I don't know how he lost his limbs, but there was a somberness to the man's
Yeah,
demeanor. And
yeah.
I suspect very strongly, right, that he would have been whole had he not been sent on some mission. And whether that's true of that individual or not, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the suicide rates and all the rest. And it's like, yes, these people were lied to. Yes, they were used. Yes, a lot of them have woken up to the fact that, like, yeah, I probably would have been friends with that guy that I shot when we were breaking down doors, going through, right, various villages and towns in Iraq and Afghanistan and whatever. There's a wonderfully disturbing book called Paths of Descent. That's essentially, each chapter is written by somebody who came to the conclusion, like, wait a second, the brass is criminal. The people controlling the military and dictating who
So
we're supposed to go kill are criminals. And
yeah,
so
Tucker Carlson, when he said something very interesting on a recent podcast about his trip to the Iraq War,
that's
and
right.
how he was invited to go have dinner with the generals, and he was just absolutely abhorred by their complete lack of regard for the well-being even of their own
Appalling.
soldiers,
Yeah.
and certainly of the local population. It was just,
Yeah.
I mean, these people were just completely
They,
disconnected
they
from what
fly
was
in
actually.
private jets and, big
Yeah,
entourages, and right, none of them ever see
they're
combat.
having
None of them are
dinner
ever
and
in
nice
danger.
wine at
Yeah,
the
exactly.
military base.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just
Living
yeah.
living large on the taxpayer and
And
causing
I
no
think
end of
back,
harm.
Tain, T or Tain.
As
I
you
like to
like.
call you T,
I
but
like it.
I think back to when I was a kid. You remember the military recruiters would start to come around school,
I do.
and who would they target? I didn't realize this was happening at the time. They would target the kids who typically came from, either a broken home or had like really rough family life, or just were, problem kids. why did they do that? Those were the most vulnerable. It was
Very
like
easy.
they were
Yeah,
very, I mean, it was really predatory in my mind thinking back now.
sure,
And they're, sitting selling this dream to the kids, and you're going to travel the world, and you're
sure.
going to be so respected and all these things. And it's like, man,
The other
you know,
story that happened this past week was two U.S. Marines were attacked in Turkey. I don't know if you
in
saw
Turkey.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
getting
had
off the boat, right? They just docked.
they were walking around town somewhere. I
Okay.
saw a video. Again, it's very hard to know, ladies and gentlemen, what's going on today, but I saw this in several sources. And one video at least showed them they were accosted and actually assaulted by a mob. A mob was chanting very threateningly at them, and then a bunch of guys grabbed them, and they may have gotten beat up or something. I don't think they weren't like on the ground getting stomped, right? But apparently they were taken to medical care, and right, but it's another sign that again our leadership won't get the message yet again. But the world is truly sick and tired of all the meddling, all the warmongering, all the provocation. If we just stop provoking other countries, right, into violence, with the belief that we're somehow, right, completely immune to any kind of repercussions, I think what's going to happen in our lifetime is that we're going to see, the reality that we are not operating with impunity in all of these misadventures that we're sponsoring around the world, that will come home in our lifetime. It seems to me that it's inevitable, right? Like before the decade's out, you're going to see real trouble on American soil, and obviously the mainstream media message will be right that here we are being victimized again. We got to go fight these people or kill these people or whatever. But I think it is going to start to sink in on some level that I'm not saying that the nitwits in Washington will wake up to their folly. I'm saying that we're not going to be able to get away with this. And so what are the implications for that, right? For the currency, right? For U.S. security, right? For our place in the world and all the rest. This to me is what's unfolding that makes it such a prodigious time in history. We've never had a world dominant hegemon with the world reserve currency and all of the power that the U.S. empire possesses. We've never seen an empire so powerful, so precariously perched on the precipice. That's a great alliteration. So ready to get taken down a peg. And when and if that happens, obviously I'm not cheering for this outcome, but I do think it's coming, and I think it's going to be horrible for people who haven't really prepared for that. And so, if you want to tackle any part of that statement, I'd love to hear what you think. But also, what are the implications if the U.S. really does get taken down a peg? What happens to the U.S. dollar? What happens in some of these scenarios, and what are you doing also to really protect yourself?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I've come across this theory that I think does have some validity. And that theory is that so we've got you're talking about the American empire, and American military is kind of the epicenter of the aggressions, but they're also tied in with kind of the globalist dominated NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that is a military, uh,
Alliance, yeah,
inter, yeah, it's a multinational military force. And the theory goes that the globalist faction is actually trying to provoke the U.S. military to get to that point that you're mentioning, where it basically causes some very bad repercussions and bumps the U.S. down a peg in terms of the international power structure, both in terms of military and in terms of economics, because the two are intertwined.
of course.
And there's an interesting quote from Klaus Schwab, the guy who started the World Economic Forum, the WF, which is a mouthpiece for the
The
globalist
loathsome Klaus Schwab,
faction.
yes.
Yeah. So you remember in 2020, of course, he rolls out the Great Reset, and he says, you're going to own nothing and be happy, and, indicated where this guy's mind is. But there was a lesser known quote that didn't get as much play. But he basically said, and this wasn't in that announcement for the Great Reset, it was in some interview that he had given. And that his quote was that he believed that America needed to be knocked off as a global superpower, because if they could get them reduced, if they could get the US knocked down a peg, it would be more open to wholesale globalist policies. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like
That seems
There's
true. That seems true to
yeah,
me. You know, that seems like
it's
a legitimate, that doesn't seem very conspiratorial. That seems like that's a legitimate policy effort. I was in Mexico last year watching thousands of people. Like we drove along the Pacific Coast Highway in Oaxaca, watching hundreds and hundreds of people just stream north, and nothing shocking about that. I mean, they sleep in the bushes and the cornfields, and then they wake up and then they walk. And sometimes they get tuk-tuks or motorcycles, and they jump on a back and pay, 50 pesos to get up the road. But the one thing that did catch your eye about that is there's big, shall we say, overfed, pasty white looking North American young people guiding it and walking along with them. And, occasionally, right, everybody's well fed and right. It's tremendous to watch, but
they're
it
probably working
does,
for the NGOs, right? The
sure, and
non-governmental
somebody's paying them.
organizations.
Yeah, somebody's
Yeah,
paying them, but the amount of people, everything from, there's Asian people, there like every nationality or certainly every race and ethnic makeup was represented as we watched the entire caravans. I mean, just hundreds of people walking along the highway and heading, into the US. And so um, the idea that the globalists could provoke the United States into a military response. What happens if the US is defeated in a battle, like a Waterloo kind of moment, right, for the US military? Like huge numbers of sailors and ships go to the bottom in a big
I
onslaught of.
don't even think it's about who wins the battle or not. I think it's about over, just committing all these resources, just the over, just an excessive amount of resources that drains every other aspect. And it's
Sure.
kind of the same thing they're doing with Russia. Like they want the US to
Yeah.
be doing the same thing because they're forcing Russia to commit, an enormous amount of resources to defend itself in with, from the Ukraine stuff, which of course
Right.
NATO is fomenting, the US is
Right.
supplying arms and all this stuff that, it's like they want everybody to overcommit, which then depletes the economy because we see the impacts. It very much looks like we're in a recession already for a lot of people.
Sure.
We've had excessive consumer price inflation in this country for the first time since the 70s, which is a direct result of the excessive spending from government, of which
Of nine
a
trillion
very large
dollars of fake
portion,
money. Yeah.
yeah, and a very large portion of that goes to military adventurism.
Yeah.
And so it's yeah, so the economics is tied to the military engine just by participating.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you win or lose, the
Just by playing
economic
along.
results are poor.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so yeah, so what I mean that's where having a robust investment plan comes into place. In turn, you ask what am I doing about it? Well, I've got an asset allocation model to where I'm allocating to gold, I'm allocating to Bitcoin. I've got some choice stock investments, including oil, natural gas, and
What do
uranium,
you make
which
of the oil price? I mean, I'm not paying attention except that I know it's below $70 as of this
yes,
morning. I my friend Alex Craner, who writes a really killer Substack,
yeah,
Trend
he's good.
Compass. Yeah, he's great. He's a great guy. I really enjoy him. He also talked about, in the short term, there's going to be real weakness in the oil price. What is that? I mean, are you tracking that at all? Do you have anything to enlighten our audience
Uh,
about?
I mean, a little bit. I can't say anything for certain. It's clearly a highly contentious geopolitical market, meaning there are geopolitical actors in there doing things. And just one example, I mean, an easy example is they drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve here in the US, the Biden administration, specifically to push gas prices down. So they could say, hey, we're doing something
Wasn't
about
that nice of
inflation.
them?
They also changed the weighting of the Brent crude benchmark in such a way that it would kind of artificially make the oil price look lower. And then you've got all kinds of activities in the futures market. And I
Yeah.
don't know who's involved in those activities, but if you track the oil price on a weekly basis and look at the chart, it's almost, and it's been a little while since I looked at it, but it seems like almost every Friday oil gets slammed in terms of the price getting pushed
Interesting.
lower,
Yeah.
which you can manipulate in the futures market by
Right.
taking contracts that you never intend to take delivery of oil on, or you can sell the contracts
Interesting.
short. I mean, there's just all kinds of shenanigans. But it looks like they do that every Friday. They try to push the price of oil lower. I don't know who they is. You know, that's
Right,
a
right.
universal thing.
Well, you know, this
Somebody
thing,
wants a lower oil price.
yeah, in my untrained mind, financially untrained mind, you know, the US is really, really pushing for a war with Iran. Iran controls the Straits of Hormuz. I know they've run military exercises, and every time in every exercise, the US gets its ass handed to it. And Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, which is something like 25 or 40% of the world's oil, like some insane, you know, amount of oil comes out of that Persian Gulf area. And so, you know, how is oil not, you know, 100, 150, right? Obviously, no violence as of this recording, and this could change in a heartbeat. Obviously, nothing, no shooting is going on now, or very little is going on, right? Israel, Lebanon, right? All of that is warming up and certainly looks very threatening, like it could erupt at any time. But how is the oil price not responding?
That is
I guess the
curious.
question, yeah,
Yeah,
the
wars
question
in
is
the Eastern Europe, wars in the Middle East, like, and yet oil is just moving lower.
OPEC's
You know?
cutting. Yeah, exactly. It's like,
Okay, yeah.
okay, it doesn't make sense to me, but long term, right? You're bullish oil, you're long oil, right? I certainly am. Seems to make sense.
Yeah, yeah, with the caveat that if you actually had a US regulatory system that basically allowed the oil and gas industry in this country to you know, really, really truly drill the lands that we have. Yeah, by all the research I've seen, we've got an ocean of oil and natural gas in this country. There's just all kinds of restrictions in place upon the industry, upon, you know,
Sure,
can you get a license or not? And so if that were to happen, you know, that would be bearish for the price of oil because it
sure.
would, you know, supply would increase. But as of right now, yeah, I'm long oil. We've been long oil for 2 years, and the other
Yeah,
factor there is we being the industry, energy industry, shifted something like $4 trillion since 2016 to renewable energy development, mostly solar and wind power. And of
might as
course, they
well
were
lit that money
screaming,
on fire.
yeah, I know. And they were telling us we're going to have net zero and we're going to run our, you know, it was very clear we will never, ever run an advanced economy on renewable energy because it's not nearly as, I mean, you can't even classify it as dense. When we talk about traditional energy, we talk about what's the energy density. Well, you
Yeah.
can't say that about solar and wind because there is no density. It's intermittent, you know, is the sun
Please.
shining, is the wind blowing?
Please,
Um,
please.
and
I have a chart here. I'm just gonna I think I can share screen here and bring this up. Whoops, hold on. And I'll edit out this my clunky clicking here. But this is kind of worth seeing because it's very interesting. Um my buddy Paul sent this. Whoops, I can't do that. All right. So what you're seeing here, total metal required to produce one generation of technology units to phase out fossil fuels, right?
and can
And
you
the,
maximize that window?
yeah, okay. Total metal required to produce one generation of tech units to phase out fossil fuels. And then the tonnage, right? Global
Right.
metal production in 2019, right? So you see, this is what they did in 1 year in 2019. This is what they did. Again, this is for copper, right? And so these are metals and resources required for renewables, right? And so the
Yeah.
total number of years at 2019 production rates is 100. It would take
It'd take 189 years
189
to
years.
produce
Yeah,
enough copper
copper
to
for one
power the
year.
renewable energy
Right.
for one
And
year.
get rid of fossil fuels for an entire year. Okay. So, okay, stick with it. The one
Yet
that
we want to
really,
close down mines and everything, you know?
yeah, exactly. You know,
It
they're
just doesn't
closing
have.
mines in Panama, right? So again, this is back to our original, and we're gonna have to wrap up. I just want to show you this one here because it is a bit of a germanium. Okay, I don't even know what it
Okay.
is. It's a rare earth metal. It's probably required for solar. You know, some portion of the
Yeah.
renewables require
Yeah.
this. 29,113 years at the 2019 production levels in order to get 1 year of renewables that would help phase out fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So, point being, right? Obviously, like a lot of things you're being told today, it's not possible that that's real, right? The narrative around, hey, let's phase out fossil fuels, is not real, right? You're being lied to, like clearly lied to. And so, what is it about? What it is about is control, slave,
Control.
right? It's
Go eat
about
those
this
bugs.
stratification of a tremendously small, concentrated group of people with unfathomable amounts of wealth and power, and a huge bottom layer to the pyramid of whatever's left of humanity to eat bugs and like it. And that is what is happening. That is what is taking place. I don't think that's an illusion. I don't think that's a false narrative. I don't think it's certainly not a conspiracy, right? The people who I'll leave you with this thought, because I'm actually taking off for another event tomorrow, and I'll do a presentation that's a variation on a presentation that I did in Dubai earlier this year. And I think it's a really worthwhile question to ponder: to what degree are the events that are unfolding around us being driven by malevolence versus rank stupidity? I think that's a good open question, because obviously you had a 19-year-old daughter of your neighbor who lives down the street who would like to see less pollution. That doesn't smack of malevolence, but she may have been told some things that are untrue about what it's going to take to phase out fossil fuels. And I think that this issue of ignorance, is a big problem, isn't it?
Yeah,
it really is.
By the way, I turned on the Lord of the Rings series that Amazon Prime did.
Yes.
I turned that on just last night. They did season number 2. And I love the original Lord of the Rings books, the J.R.R. Tolkien, and some good underlying themes in there. Well, there's a scene in this first episode of season 2 where they're out, and it's like the little halfling hobbit folks, and then I think a wizard.
Yes.
We haven't got to the character reveal part yet, but they're out, like they're traveling somewhere, and then they're in this kind of not exactly the desert, but something similar, and they're out of food. And the little hobbit says to the wizard guy, do something to that tree. He could apparently had some power to help the trees heal or something. And so she was like, maybe there'll be some fruit because we need something to eat. And so he does something to the tree, and the tree blows up. And then all these like giant beetles and bugs start running out. And the hobbit creature says, oh, yay, we've got food now. And then they sit and they cook these bugs over a fire and eat them. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, good Lord, if that's not propaganda.
Everything is propaganda. Everything now, Amazon, Netflix, it's all propaganda. And so that's another Rubicon that we've crossed. But I guess that's all we can share with folks today, because I need to go pick up my son. And yeah, I wanna tackle next time, Joe. I want to talk about something interesting that's happening. Obviously El Salvador, Russia just announced that they're going to allow cryptocurrency trading to settle, I think, internationally. And what's happening in the stable coin, Tether, USDC are the two big ones, I think.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a de facto way around US sanctions using US currency, right? Which are backed by treasuries, but we'll have to get into this next week because it's fascinating. Does this allow people to sort of circumvent whatever the US can or thinks they can do to stop you transacting business? If so, how much longer is that going to be allowed? And where's this all heading?
That's an interesting conversation. So we'll look forward to that one. Stay tuned. The No Name Podcast shall continue.
The No Name Podcast rolls on. Awesome, my friend.
All right,
Thanks
man.
very
Have
much.
safe travels. Enjoyed
that was fun. Thanks. You as well. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Take
Bye.
care.